Previously, Insta360's action cameras were pretty good, but they all came with big trade-offs. The Insta360 Go was super tiny and portable, but it lacked high-speed shooting at 4K. The One RS was modular, which was interesting, but it was heavy and bulky. So, what can Insta360 do when it tries to make no compromises in an action camera? This is the Insta360 Ace Pro, and it's time to take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running things here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys about the Insta360 Ace Pro. But before I do, I'm gonna go over some disclosures. This camera and all the cameras that I'm gonna be comparing against in this video are cameras that I purchased myself, so no one sent them to me, and no one's paying me to make this video, and no one's gonna get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Insta360 Ace Pro. And because all action cameras these days have a wide range of features, I think it's gonna be helpful to narrow it down to my specific use case. I review running shoes on YouTube, and I also attend running events and do some travel vlogging when I'm out there on running adventures. So I need really good image clarity. I like to shoot in 4K and 120 frames per second so I can get silky smooth, slow motion so I can better see the product. And I also need to be able to have a camera that can handle a wide range of lighting conditions. And I also am going to need really great audio as well, especially when it comes to wind rejection. So those are the kind of things that I'm generally looking at. So let's take a look at how the Insta360 Ace Pro stacks up. First, when it comes to action shots, when I'm reviewing shoes or when I'm making a training video where I'm filming myself on the run using the Insta360 Ace Pro as an action camera, I'm typically in the regular video shooting mode, shooting at 4K and 120 frames per second. I feel like the image quality there is pretty good. The stabilization is pretty good, but it just feels like I'm not getting a 4K image. It just doesn't feel like there's a lot of room to zoom in on anything, which is particularly important when I am shooting race footage, when I'm capturing other people racing, or when I'm shooting short form content. Typically what I do is I don't turn my camera to create vertical video. I just leave it in the same mode that I would record for YouTube, and then I just punch in the center of the video in order to make my short form content. And I feel like when I do that, the image is blurry, as if I'm trying to upscale a 1080 image. So I just feel like there isn't a lot of clarity, there isn't a lot of headroom when it comes to image clarity when I'm working with the Insta360 Ace Pro. And overall, I would just say, like, when I'm running with this camera, it doesn't feel very action friendly. Typically I have this camera on a selfie stick, and so if I wanted to run with it, I'm either running with it where the camera is facing me this way if you want to see me, or if I want to show my shoes, I flip the camera over on the selfie stick and I put it low to the ground. In either event, it's not really all that practical for me to use the flippy screen that this thing has, especially if I'm trying to run quickly. And so this always stays down. And fortunately, there is still an LCD screen that at least lets me know that the camera is operating, but this flippy screen is pretty much something I never actually use. The other thing that I have a problem with is because I'm taking this out on long runs or during races, and I always rely on the quick capture modes in all of my action cameras. And what that is, you hit the shutter button from the camera off, it automatically turns on, starts recording, and then when you hit the shutter button again, it should stop recording and turn itself off. Now, the Insta360 Ace Pro does something really weird that kind of reminds me of using video cameras back in like the tape era, like mini DV tapes, where there is a quick capture mode, but sometimes when I hit the shutter button again to turn it off, it doesn't turn off the camera, it just kind of pauses recording. And then if I hit the record button again, it'll resume recording again. Instead of creating separate little files, it just starts to create one really long file. It doesn't make sense for my workflow. I don't need it to make one long clip. I'm gonna take all my clips and edit them in editing software later. So I like having lots of little clips. It's easier for me to manage. But instead, this kind of wants to make one big mega clip, which I also just feels like it's very terrifying that something could go wrong in the file writing process and I could just lose like a whole entire race's worth of footage. So I really don't like that kind of like multi-clip function that the Insta360 Ace Pro has. And sometimes when I hit the record button a second time to end my quick capture, sometimes it ends the quick capture, and other times it goes into that mega clip creation mode. And so what I frequently find myself doing is hitting the button once to record and then just triple tapping seems to always end the recording and sending the camera into the off mode. It's just a really weird quirk that I wasn't expecting from this camera. It's not a feature that I find helpful or useful at all. The other thing that really bothers me about this camera is that it's very easy to make accidental setting changes. As I'm touching it, turning it off, because the triple button press thing that I had to do to turn off the quick capture, I'm always accidentally changing the camera mode from the one I want to maybe photo on accident, or I'm changing it from D-warp, which is what I prefer, and it changes to wide or even ultra, which I absolutely detest. So annoying. Why does it do that? Now let's look at the footage itself a little bit closer. The stabilization is pretty good, but I don't find it to be as good as stabilized as the GoPro is. In my opinion, it's closer to what I'm getting whenever I use the DJI Osmo Action 4. And so I feel like those two levels of stabilization are a little bit closer. And even when I slow the footage down from 120 frames per second to 30 frames per second in slow motion, even then I still feel like there's a little bit more camera bounce than I would like to see in some of my action footage. Now let's talk about some of the wind rejection. And here is a real bright spot for this camera. I think that this has excellent audio quality and also really great wind rejection. And for me, someone that's gonna use this action camera as an action camera and run with it, wind is pretty much always going to be a concern, even if it's not windy, because your movement through space as you're running is going to create some wind noise over that microphone if the camera itself doesn't have good wind rejection. I'd say that it's really close, if not as good as the audio on the GoPro Hero, which I always feel like is top in class when it comes to action camera audio. Yo, what's going on? Today I'm gonna take you along for my long run workout as I get ready for the Houston half. On deck, I've got 2 times a little bit more than 5K and half marathon effort with about a mile jog recovery. Audio test here on the Insta360 Ace Pro. I'm in Times Square on a Wednesday night over the holiday break. And a lot of people, pretty dark except for all the bright lights here on all the signs. Just checking out how the audio is doing. There's just giant fans going on behind me. There's a lot of crowd noise. Just a lot of stuff happening. Just about 4 miles into the run, hands are starting to get cold even though I got regular gloves on. The nice thing is this jacket has built-in glove shields, so I get a second layer, a waterproof layer to protect my hands. I don't feel like I need to put anything additional onto the action camera itself, whether I'm using the GoPro or the Insta360 Ace Pro, when it comes to being able to record what I want to say to the camera. If I'm using this as a general vlog camera, that's where I feel like the Insta360 Ace Pro really starts to become a much better camera, something that has more features that are worth using. That's where I feel like having this flippy screen can be a little bit more useful if you're using it for vlogging and you're in a new reduce space and you want to make sure something is properly framed behind you, having the flippy screen does give you a little bit bigger real estate to be able to use in terms of lining up those kinds of shots. I don't think it's absolutely necessary because most action cameras are really wide, and it's rarely the case where it's not wide enough. But there are certain instances where I felt like, you know, having that flippy screen was useful from a vlogging perspective. And when I'm vlogging, I still prefer, even for my vlog content, to be able to shoot at 4K 120. That's how I use my GoPro. I don't switch it to higher resolutions and drop it down to 30 frames per second. I always just leave it at 4K 120 because sometimes there are things that I might want to turn the camera around after I've been talking to it and show people and put that into slow motion. And I don't like to have to flip around between, you know, regular talking to the camera mode and action mode. I just leave it there so that way I always have the option of slowing something down into slow motion if I want. The best way to use the Insta360 Ace Pro though is to switch modes. And so they talk about this separate AI chip that they have in there that's going to give you better low light quality. And I think that's a really interesting mode. I think it works really well. I took it for a lot of family videos in New York, traveling over the holiday and doing our touristy thing. But I've also taken it to the gym to see how it works in a low light environment of something that's indoors. And in that situation where I don't think I'm going to need high frame rates, or I'm not as concerned if maybe I don't get that frame rate shot, I feel like the trade-offs in terms of being able to get that really good low light quality image isn't as big of a trade-off. The downside though then is that the next day when I do want to get high frame rate action footage, I'm going to have to make sure that I remember to switch camera modes, which is something that I don't really like to have to jump around and do a lot, because when I'm using an action camera, I just want to be able to hit the record button, point it at what I needed to point it at, and hit the record button again to stop recording. I just don't like to have to tinker around with a lot of settings. So that's something that's on me in terms of my workflow, but it is a little bit of a trade-off. But I do think that the low light performance is surprisingly good on this camera. I'm not saying that you're going to be able to go run with this camera in the dark, because if you switch it to 4K 120, that option to use that AI chip that's in this camera goes away. So you're just using it like a regular camera. There is a relatively large sensor in this camera though, so you are getting pretty decent low light performance, but nothing that I think is very different from what exists in some of its competition. And just the last thing that I'll say about this camera though is that it's just very cumbersome to work with. I already mentioned that I have some problems with it in terms of the quick capture modes and being able to use this as an action camera, especially when I'm running with gloves on. But the other thing is that this camera is really big and heavy. Not only does it become bigger and bulkier with this flip up screen turned up, but the camera itself is heavy. And the part that connects to it to be able to mount it to a GoPro style mount, this is also big and adds a little bit of extra size and weight. Compare it to the GoPro in terms of size. The Insta360 Ace Pro is a lot bigger. Compared to the DJI Osmo Action 4, the Insta360 Ace Pro is a lot bigger and heavier as well. And it's something that is definitely noticeable, and I consider it a problem if you want to use this as an action camera, something that you want to run with, do endurance sports with, take action footage with. I think that the weight is a problem. For general vlogging, definitely can live with this, but for action camera use, I think it's too big and too heavy. Overall, I think it's an interesting vlog camera. I think it's a very good vlog camera. I think for a lot of people, it'll be a really good first action camera because that flippy screen helps you figure out how to frame yourself in relation to an action camera's field of view. But I just don't think it's a great action camera, and I really don't think it's a pro action camera. It feels like all the features are built around a novice user. Now let's take a look at some of the pricing. The Insta360 Ace Pro comes in at $450, and I just think that's way too expensive for what you're getting in this camera. In comparison, the DJI Osmo Action 4 comes in at $400, and the GoPro Hero 12, although they do some funky stuff in terms of discounts and if you sign up for their subscription service, but you could get this for as low as $350, and then you can always cancel that free subscription service that gives you the discount. So you could do a little bit of juggling around, but you can get this camera for $350. So the Insta360 Ace Pro, it's still not something that I'm gonna recommend for people wanting to use it as a running action camera. So those are my thoughts on these cameras. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to talk to you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?